Okay, so let's talk about some politics. For the first thing is, I mean, this is going to be some. It was funny when I was setting up this slide. I always kind of reuse. I opened the week three recap from last semester, and I used the basic same structure. I just, I'm a big believer in recycling. I just, what I re-record the first part, I just re-record all the audio, and I changed the stuff here. And so I looked at what I had recorded last semester, which would have been sometime in probably February or January, February, and the coronavirus stuff was at the bottom of this. The first part was about impeachment, and at the bottom was some stuff about coronavirus. And it'd be interesting for me to go back to all my previous recaps and kind of see the evolution of my thoughts on this, and how I've been wrong and how I've been right, and or how there's this real lack of understanding that we're all trying to grapple with. And so for the last few months, though, the coronavirus stuff has always been kind of first, right? Because this is the most prescient thing in America right now. We're all dealing with this at some level. So this week, not much has changed in one respect. The Trump administration said that there's the hope for a vaccine by the end of October, and that would be fantastic for a variety of different reasons. But people are suspicious of the date, and people say, well, this is trying to influence election, and I mean they're absolutely right. And I mean anyone who has a vested interest in getting and winning in November, who's in power, wants this vaccine. And so absolutely Trump's trying to push for an early October release. I don't think that's any surprise for anyone, or nor that's I mean it's not, as long as he's not pushing this unsafely, and that's absolutely something you would expect any politician to do. It will be safe. I mean, I think that's one thing that they're pushing very hard to make sure it is. And one respect, it's moving very fast. In another respect, it's going to be widely tested as well. It's one, the amount of criticism and amount of oversight is going to be immense on this. And so you can make an argument that it could be unsafe because of how fast, but then you can make a counter argument saying, well, at the same time, they're testing this pretty thoroughly, and everyone's looking at this stuff. Russia released a vaccine, I think, this week or this month, and I would not trust a Russian vaccine at all. But nevertheless, I think it would be surprising if they got it in October. But for everything I've read, I'm not a medical doctor, but it would be surprising. But it absolutely is a political thing, and for both sides, right? If of course, Joe Biden is not going to say, well, if they get it in, great, it's good for everyone. His vested interest is to be critical, right? And so always going to be critical of what Trump says, no matter even if it's good. I think Joe Biden's response to the virus, his coronavirus response, plan, it will be interesting because one, it'll be too pretty much. I think I would argue too little, too late. Hopefully by that time it'll be a mute point. The other issue is that often what he said is like, I would have the vaccine even faster, and it's like, well, duh. And so I didn't. I find a lot of Joe Biden's policy recommendations to be they're not that dissimilar in one respect from Trump, and a lot of the economic policies and coronavirus policies. In practice, however, there is a lot of difference, and there's some differences clearly in like law enforcement. But I found Joe Biden's policy proposals sometimes to be more nascent than actualized or articulated well. I think he needs to do a better job articulating his policy differences, other than that, other than the stuff on that Donald Trump wants him to talk about, which is race relations. He needs to talk about something else very different. And so, um, I think that's something that absolutely he needs to talk about. Okay. The other big thing is the evictions. So the Trump administration used the CDC to stop evictions. The argument is that if you there's a and it only stops evictions for a very small subset of people, and what it would do is it would say if you meet this criteria, you cannot be evicted, because the problem is that the argument is this would further spread the coronavirus because you have nowhere to go, you have nowhere safe to go. And that is partially true, but I think this is more of a way to stop the flow of people getting evicted, because that's a massive problem. Because many of these people are not they have lost their job for no fault of their own, and if they can't pay it, and the government's not no longer providing the extra unemployment benefits, this is going to be a massive problem because where do they go? And then if people are not paying their rent, well, that's going to have a trickle effect upon the landlords, who then have problems with paying their mortgage, and then have problems. Those are mortgage-backed securities, which will then affect the bond market, and it goes on and on and on and on. So is this the right decision? It's hard to say, right? It's a problematic decision because it's going to have a lot of effects on people because if you can't evict someone's not paying rent, there's someone that is paying your rent essentially, right? But then again, if someone, where people who are not where these people are supposed to go, and they lost their job through pretty much no fault of their own, and that's really, something that has to be grappled with. Okay, moving on. So the jobs report, which is connected to coronavirus, was released this week, and it was better than expected. Even despite the unemployment, the federal unemployment extra benefits ending and various other things, it still did well. We still gained jobs. We're still below the February numbers, but part of the point is that one of the points is that this is kind of the low hanging fruit, and so gaining the rest of the jobs back would be much more difficult. The other big factor is that this is very good for Donald Trump. The better the jobs numbers look, the better it is for him. And so he ran on a good economy. He's continuing to run on a good economy on what he could do to bolster the economy, and this bodes well for him. Will it make or break him? Will it ensure his victory? It's impossible to say. I keep on every week. I don't really post them. Talk about them. I talk about them. I don't post them very much. There's all these different polling numbers, and I think I do talk about them. I think later. I think I'll mention them in a little bit. But these polling numbers, and the problem is that there's so many variables that it's really hard to make sense of them. And it's hard to know how accurate they're going to be as a predictor, and so they're not. That's a problem. So okay. So anyways, moving on. Joe Biden went to Kenosha, Wisconsin. Donald Trump went there earlier last week. Joe Biden met with Mr. Blake's family, and spoke to Mr. Blake, and he had a very different message. Donald Trump talked about law and order. Joe Biden talked about race relations, systemic racism. So there really is this really different view of America, a really different view of things, and that is, that's probably what's going to define each campaign more than anything else, which is unfortunate in one respect, because I think there's dynamics to both that are interesting and true, that would be, for a real dialogue between the two opposing viewpoints to happen, you'd have to have some type of common ground, and I don't think either side is willing to give a common ground, which leads to my next point, is conflict in the United States. We saw in Portland, in Kenosha, there was a 17-year-old who killed two protesters. And the circumstances, well, it's debatable, right? The people on the right view him as a self-defense shooting. People on the left view them as him acting as a police officer and killing two people. I'm not going to weigh in on whether he was right or wrong. Then you have Portland, it's kind of the reverse. You have an Antifa member kill someone from, I think, the Patriots Prayer group. I guess they're a right-wing group. I'd actually never heard of them prior to this. I think I might have heard of them. I never really researched them that much. There's a whole host of different groups, and I don't know all of them, unfortunately. Or fortunately, because they're kind of depressing to read some of the stuff. But and the shooter in the Portland case, the Antifa member, was shot and killed by federal law enforcement, or I think federal law enforcement this last week too. But they're both, he's viewing this as a civil war, and this idea that there's a civil war brewing is, to me, kind of ridiculous. There is definitely tension. There's definitely more conflict. But what we have are groups who are defining themselves in these monolithic terms. and the groups that are defining themselves as a conflict, and they view what they're doing as morally justifiable. But these are not the society writ large. They're small subsets that view themselves as larger than they really are, in my opinion. And so there definitely is conflict and tension. But you have, I call them LARPers, basically, like, people like the Proud Boys and Antifa, where they view themselves as, these large movements, or these precursors to large movements. These, this is, I think that the Portland shooter said that was the first shot in the Civil War, and that's just not the case. Civil Wars break out for a variety of different reasons, and there's a lot of other precursors. And the right likes to talk about the Balkanization of America, really like the Balkans. And the problem with it is analytically, that's just a ridiculous statement to make. There's a whole host of problems with that I'm not going to get into right now, but it's pretty silly in my opinion. But so there definitely is tension and conflict, but where that conflict lies is, I think, relatively isolated. And the problem is that how people have these, and this is how we as a society have become more politicized in the ideological extremes over time, and that is something that we will have to grapple with at some level. Okay, moving on once more. There's been a report, I think The Atlantic reported that Trump made some disparaging comments about the military this week, and Trump flatly denies this, and these are come from anonymous sources. The Atlantic has defended this, as did Fox News, one of the reporters who then Trump attacked. The problem with anonymous sources is that they're anonymous. The reporters say, well, I trust them, right? The problem is that just leads into kind of Trump's whole narrative about the media. Could they have happened? Absolutely. Trump tends to speak off the cuff, and I don't fully think that sometimes his statements, he understands what he's saying, or he understands the way he's coming off. Trump champions himself as very pro-military, and I think in one respect he is. In terms of benefits, into making sure that they have the right equipment getting to the soldiers, but he also disparages the military, the leadership of the military, and also he has some of his policies are frustrating to the military, and so he has this complicated relationship with them, and my problem with any anonymous source is that the same with like Barack Obama. He was reported, he said something very disparaging about Joe Biden. The problem is, it could be true. It's possible. I think it's a normal possibility. The problem is there's no way to verify it right now. And so, in terms of military support, I think the military will most likely side with Donald Trump because of the material benefit that he'll provide for them, in terms of just pay and support. The Obama administration military morale was much lower, because Democratic presidents tend to focus on other things in the military forces, and that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just it's a reality when you start shifting over to hopefully to other priorities. And Trump has done something very much differently, but Trump's overall policies, his larger policies, have been seen by military leadership as very problematic. Okay, moving on. The NRA. There's a book released about the NRA by one of the former leadership positions. This gentleman has had his own share of problems, but it paints a very negative picture. And you have the New York Attorney General also. They've filed a lawsuit against the NRA. The NRA is, from what we can see from the outside, is a very sick organization. And I point this out not because I'm for or against the NRA. It's because this is an example of a lobbyist group that's very, very powerful, that has unraveled very, very fast. The NRA was monolithic and very powerful for many, many years, and they've lost a lot of their luster, and in part because of their own internal problems. And this is a very interesting case of how a very powerful interest group unravels. And we've seen this before. And if you counterpose this to someone like Black Lives Matter, and I talked about this in lecture 4, Black Lives Matter, their rise to prominence now was really pretty fraught. In 2016, they were quite critical of Hillary Clinton and actually were problematic for her, because of their rhetoric, because of how critical they were for her support of the '94 crime bill. Joe Biden also supported that same crime bill, but they've come out very different in different rhetoric, and they've done quite well for themselves, despite some statements I think were problematic in terms about their ideological background. Nevertheless, and so you see this rise, and if they can maintain a good overall structure and messaging, they will do quite well. While the NRA has had a long history of support and good finances, and they've unraveled themselves for the internal problems. So whether the NRA will be able to regain their footing has yet to be determined. Lastly, is I want to point out Rwanda Rest. I'm not going to pronounce this last name because I don't think I can pronounce it well. Paul, I guess I'll try it. Rescue Baginina, sorry, I destroyed that. Sorry, but Paul, he was the proprietor of the Hotel Medellins in Rwanda during the Rwanda genocide, and the movie Hotel Rwanda was about him and his struggle there. And he's an amazing individual who did amazing things during a horrific time. And if you read anything about Rwanda in 1994. I mean, during the genocide, it was just horrific. Just no other way to describe it. Nevertheless, he was arrested this week by the Kagame-led government. Paul Kagame came to power in 1994 when he led the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, to stop the genocide. Paul was a strong critic of the government, and he was arrested. And I point this out, one, for personal interest, because I spent time in Rwanda. I love Rwanda as a country, and now what you see is the government there has become dictatorial essentially, and because of good PR, the Kagame-led government has held a lot of favor with the international community, mostly because they've been able to paint themselves as, well, you guys let this genocide happen, please give us a lot of support. And they've done a fairly good job of keeping things relatively stable. The problem is that over time they become more and more aggressive and dictatorial, and they've killed opposition leaders and become essentially this is becoming very problematic. And if they're starting to suppress opposition leaders by arresting them internationally abroad, this has become more and more problematic. And I just point this out as a way to understand that there's internal dynamics in every country that while people might watch, look at Paul Kagame, he stopped the genocide. He himself is a very problematic figure now. And as I point that out, don't ever hitch your wagon to a political leader and think, oh, they're awesome, because oftentimes there's much more complicated. Paul Kagame has turned out to be, after she's 30 some odd, we're into, so it would be 28 years in power, or 26 years in power, sorry, now a very problematic figure, which is unfortunate because of the good he had done before. So that's it for this week. Thank you all. I'll talk to you all later.